all our clinicians use evidence-based approach and a very collaborative way. The goals should never be driven by us. They need to be really meaningful for your family. And the tasks, the homework also need to be really meaningful.
Yeah. And I suppose it's really great for families as a starting point, if they're about to explore this journey, that evidence-based is a really great place to start, because they're already investing lots of time and money, or going to be investing all of these things. So it's a great place to start, knowing that there's some solid evidence that it's going to support their child. Hello, Kaya and Wanju. Welcome to Kiind Conversations, where we're simplifying the caring journey one conversation at a time. I'm Teresa, Peer Navigation Lead here at Kiind, and your host. As always, we're here to explore the topics that matter most to parents and carers raising children with disability. To begin our conversation, we'd like to acknowledge that we are recording this podcast on the Whadjuk Noongar Boodja. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. Today's episode is going to be packed with lots of useful information for families. To help us dive into it, we have Kiind Peer Navigator Sharon back with us.
Hello.
Hi, Sharon. And now let's welcome today's wonderful guest, Dr Mei'en Lim, who is a clinical lead and clinical psychologist at CliniKids.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. So, to start, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at CliniKids and how you work with families?
Sure. My name is Mei'en, and basically I'm a clinical psychologist, which means we look a lot at the family systems around the child. We also obviously do work with kids themselves, depending on age and appropriateness. We talk to families about their families of origin, because that's really important. Just being able to know and explore how you were parented as you step into this space of caregiving and parenting. And so I guess I like to think about it a bit like when there's something wrong. I've used this analogy before. There's something wrong in the house. Maybe you've sprung a leak and you call a plumber, and the plumber tries to fix the leak, and then it doesn't quite work. 2 weeks down the road, something else happens. I was corrected by fellow colleagues by saying we're not plumbers. It feels like we're a bit more like architects. So we might have to bring the blueprint in, and we might have to look at what's behind the walls and where's this coming from this aspect. So it's a little bit more systemic. And we step back a little bit and just have a think about it.
Wonderful. So in our last episode, we were joined by a colleague of yours, Marie Rodatz, who spoke on what to do as parents if they're having concerns with their child's development and how to secure early supports. So today is a continuation of that. With your knowledge and experience, we'll be talking parents through how to identify the right supports for their child, particularly ones that are evidence-based best practice. We recognise that for parents, making decisions around therapies for your child can feel overwhelming, and everyone's experience is unique. So we'll do our best to provide you with support and information throughout the episode. As always, if you'd like to discuss your individual circumstances with the Kiind team, you can book a free pathway planning session, and the link will be in the show notes. So let's get started. We know that evidence-based best practice is a term that parents and carers hear a lot, but let's talk about what it actually means. Mei'en, can you please explain to our listeners?
Sure. So I think when we think about evidence-based practice, we often think about the research. At CliniKids, we like to think about it more almost as a three-prong approach. So if I can think of it like as a triangle, where one aspect is the research evidence and the other aspect at the bottom might be clinical experience and expertise. And then what pulls this beautiful triangle together is the individual context and preferences of families, right? Because we know that every child is unique. And I think when we can approach it that way, as a more holistic approach, because research can sometimes say something, parents might go, I'm not doing that, or that's not in my family values, or no, you're talking about the wrong kid here. They'll never be able to engage in that kind of therapy. Then, boop, we don't have a triangle. And equally as important, I think, is sometimes there is clinical expertise that doesn't quite yet translate into research, which is a real shame. And that's part of our work at CliniKids. We want to be able to shorten that sort of bench to bedside experience, being able to really pull together what our clinicians actually doing in therapies, and how does this actually translate into research, and vice versa. How can we now put something that we know works on paper and bring it out into rooms, right? Because that's the gold right there. And instead of taking 17 years, which is like almost a full-grown human, we really want to be able to truncate that. So when we think about evidence from research, we're really, I guess, trying to go into the scholarly aspect of it. One of the wonderful databases out there, which I don't know if people know about, it's scholar.google.com, right? A bit like maps.google.com, but Scholar, because in there basically are only research articles. Like, you have to be peer reviewed. And basically peer review just means that if I'm an academic and I want to write this paper, I need to submit it to a journal, and the journal has a board of respected researchers that actually read my article and go, that doesn't make sense, or that's not really quality, or you haven't thought about this. They query what I've written, which is very different from a blog piece or public opinion or anything that is kind of not in that research space. So when I think about what is evidence-based from a research evidence arm, I think about, is this peer-reviewed? Have your peers gone, yep, we endorse this, or yep, that makes a lot of sense to us. That is quality research. So that's probably one of the big things. We also, in these spaces, talk a lot about randomized controlled trials. Another very big word. All that means is there's lots of things that are, I guess, controlled. When I think about it, it's a bit like if you have a baking recipe and they've called for 1 cup of chocolate chip and half a cup of milk, and you're like, it's too chocolatey. Well, you need to know, well, I can drop the chocolate, but if I up the milk, I'm going to change too many variables. And so RCTs actually make sure that, no, we're only looking at this variable to change, not anything else. And so we can control the rest of it. And that way we know exactly what's connected to what. Yeah. Well, as close as exactly can be, right? So that's what I think. So it's actually really important that we don't limit ourselves to RCTs or randomized controlled trials, because they're big, they're expensive. Some really good quality research actually can come from more case studies. And if we clump enough really good case studies together, you can actually have some really beautiful evidence coming through. And from a clinician perspective, I'm here at the bottom, and I am the clinician. Yeah, I don't know where I am now in my triangle. But when I think about it as a clinician, not every clinician has access to making up or developing RCTs. We're much better at case studies. I can talk for hours about each family that comes in. I can describe exactly what occurs for them in therapy. But if you ask me to put it into an RCT, that's really hard. So yeah, I guess thinking about, research evidence in that way is actually really, really important.
Yeah. And I can see that in case study evidence that you're including the family experience and what happens for the child. It's a more holistic type of evidence as well, rather than those random.
Absolutely.
Randomized controls.
Yeah, and there's a lot, when we come in and we think about the different ways to consider research, there's different ways to look at it. It doesn't always have to be quantifiable. It can be qualitative. It's just certain themes are coming up, and that's just as rich, right? And that's just as real and important for each family and each individual that's experiencing therapy.
Yeah, if there's repetition in those stories, you start to go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
They didn't know that each other were going to come in and say the same thing. Absolutely. So there's value in that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. And I think another thing when I think about clinician experience as well is back in my day, many moons ago when I was undergoing my master's degree, EMDR, which is now a gold standard for trauma therapy, eye movement desensitization repetition, at that time was almost this hocus pocus. We don't really know why it works. It seems to be emerging, but goodness, how can we do this? And I remember Professor Christopher Lee, who now works in UWA, incredible clinician, really pushing for this to come out, right? So as clinicians, we're on the ground, we're going, oh my gosh, this works. But the research evidence hasn't quite caught up. And look where we are today. So I think there is scope for almost being quite respectful of some emerging therapies, especially if they're grounded in certain frameworks that we do know works. And sometimes there is the rest of it that we don't really know how, and we'll catch up, and I think just like EMDR, we've caught up, but now there's more variations of that, right? So that's tapping, and there's all these really incredible things. You're like, wow, how does that work? I don't know, but it's coming out. So I feel like when we can combine, at least it comes together on some level. We might not need to know every single detail of the how, I think trusting that there will be research evidence in the form of peer-reviewed studies that show up later
eventually.
on. Yeah,
eventually, and it can, like you say, can be
Absolutely.
quite a lengthy period of time to gather evidence when you don't know the mechanism that's driving the result, right?
Exactly.
So there's a lot of theory and conjecture up to that point. And that story of something that was almost implausible and then now has good evidence behind it, alongside stories of a lot of implausible theories that gained a lot of traction because of gaps in knowledge, right? So I'm thinking particularly, I don't know if you know, about 15 years ago in the US, in the autism community, there was this, it was called MMS, Miracle Mineral Supplement. And it was high, I've written it down, what chlorine dioxide, which is essentially bleach, which was sold as a cure for autism on the basis that autism was caused by parasites. And so parents were giving their children this bleach essentially to ingest, and obviously there was a lot of medical complications, but what those people were able to do was jump into a gap, a knowledge gap, and exploit people's fears. So I think that point about the fact that evidence doesn't come tomorrow, but once it comes, it's got a lot of research behind it, right? It's not just a speculation.
No.
It started with the speculation, but then it had to have a lot of evidence to get to the point where you could turn around and say, it is evidence-based.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a lived experience from that sort of that individual approach as well, because when we're doing EMDR training, you have to sit on the other end and have it done. You have to think of something that bothers you, that's a touch traumatic, and you leave and you're going, I don't know how it worked, but it did. And so that I think is equally as important.
And it won't work for everyone.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
Not even the best evidence-based intervention won't work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And so really being able to think about the families that come in through our doors, how do we tailor this so that it is a unique, individualized experience? And yet we can still sit back and go, I as a clinician have the expertise to support your family, and this is the research evidence that I am using. How does that sit with you? You're the expert with your child. I'm the expert in these frameworks, and they're very smart researchers at CliniKids who are the experts at that research evidence bits, and so together we can come up with and start to roll out beautiful things like Jasper and PACT and SAS, which are all our sort of manualized kind of programs to support families in this way. And we can put hand over heart and go, we believe in this if it sits well with your family.
That collaborative approach is everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so those therapies that you chatted about just then, so what would that look like for for families and children when they're in those sessions?
Yeah, so each one is quite different. The duration of them is different. The frequency is different because, again, the research evidence says it needs this amount of time over this period of time. So all of it's really, dependent on what the actual therapies are. A lot of them are also really focused on parents. So we're actually supporting the parents to support the child. PAC's a beautiful one about that. They recognize and respond and enhance children's communication and interaction skills. And then Jasper is a bit more therapist-led, but still very play-based. And SAS, which is Secret Agent Society, is actually a really fun kind of online thing that kids themselves get to do. But again, we know kids don't live in isolation. Like, they are surrounded by family and grandparents and beautiful caregivers. And how can we actually get support around the child? And so SAS also includes quite a bit of parent work, and again, it's got to work for your family, right? Like, if we're saying you need to come in X amount of time and you're like, oh, that's really rough, that's cool, let's park it for another time. And you can come back when you're ready. But I think general services as well, all our clinicians use evidence-based approach and a very collaborative way. The goals should never be driven by us. They need to be really meaningful for your family. And the tasks, the homework also need to be really meaningful.
And I suppose it's really great for families as a starting point, if they're about to explore this journey, that evidence-based is a really great place to start, because they're already investing lots of time and money, or going to be investing all of these things. So it's a great place to start, knowing that there's some solid evidence that is going to support their child. So with that in mind, what does it mean if a therapy isn't evidence-based, and can this still be beneficial for children?
Yeah, so in some sense, the placebo effect is real, right? And when I mean placebo effect, it means I take something thinking that's going to help me, and because I believe so much that it's going to help me, it helps me. It's like if I replace my husband's Nurofen tablets, heaven forbid, with sugar tablets, and he takes the pack thinking he's taking Nurofen, and his headache is like, oh, this is great. He's like, yeah, that really worked. I'm like, did it? Was it the Nurofen or was it water? And that's the placebo effect. So there are huge amounts of studies that show placebos as significant, right? And I think that really goes back to the psychological aspect of things, which is very much in my wheelhouse, how our hope and our optimism for something that works can actually really prop up its efficacy. There's also, I guess, some challenges with, big word again, misattribution of natural development. So maybe we're having difficulties with toileting. We'll be having difficulties for years. And all of a sudden, boom, it just works. Oh, it must be this new thing that I bought from blah, blah, blah and drank. And, it's like, or, your child's actually able to have some introspection and can feel the tummy and their bowels, and they understand now that going to the toilet means, oh, this is happening.
Right. Correlation doesn't always equal causation.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
but we're hardwired to see correlation as causation. It's actually a survival instinct. So it requires a kind of a stepping back to analyse, which is, again, why evidence is so important to support something, because if we see something happen straight after something, we do tend to think, oh, well, that's A because of B.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Hi listeners, it's Teresa here. I hope you're enjoying our chat with Mei'en and picking up lots of helpful insights. I just wanted to quickly jump in and let you know about Kiind Families Facebook Network. The Kiind Families Facebook Network is WA's largest peer support group. It's a private and safe space where Kiind members can share advice, ask questions, and just connect with people who understand. If you're not already a Kiind member, it's free and easy to join. Once you do, you can request to join the Kiind Families Facebook groups and start connecting with other families who are just like you. Find out more and become a member at kiind.com.au. Now let's get back to the episode. So I imagine that a lot of the non-evidence-based therapies are based on what you chatted about earlier, so personal testimonials rather than research. So again, what parents can share and what parents can input into the non-evidence-based therapies is really important.
Yes, definitely. And I think a really helpful thing to think about is maybe flipping it over, what can we look for? Like for evidence-based therapies, and that might be reliable websites, right? Like a government-based websites, or looking for what's in the hyperlink is a gov.au or something. Again, I really like scholar.google, peer-reviewed. I actually find ChatGPT quite tricky, because even though you ask for peer-reviewed, I feel like the limitations are quite broad. And so when I look at the links, I'm like, yeah, that's not peer-reviewed. I think just being a bit aware of that, and then thinking about it, simple rule of thumb is going to the website and seeing what they've said about themselves. Where has this come from? A cheeky thing some people do is they might self-reference. So if they, cite quite a few, or they put out quite a few articles that have been published, just checking, is their family name in all of these articles? That's a bit sus. So it's a bit like, the way I thought about it today was, when I go to Instagram for food reviews, right? And you think, oh, is this a paid review? Or did you genuinely go into there as a paying customer? Or were you invited? And I think that really can change the game a little bit. Is there
or
a dual?
Are you the owner trying to sell me your food, right? So,
I was just gonna
follow
say,
the money, right?
Yeah. Or is this your relative's cafe? So I think the same kind of thing we would do, when we want an honest, really on the ground type of review for any product that we put our money and our time. I think the same thing of therapies, just kind of doing that and then bringing it to your therapist, just asking them, hey, I read up this thing. What do you think about it? Yeah.
Probably important to note also that only evidence-based therapies are covered through NDIS and Medicare. So if you want things to be covered by them, you will be forced down the path of what is known as best evidence at the time.
Great.
Yeah, it's a good one for families to know and be aware of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So those are some really helpful tips and some really great information. When families are speaking to their providers about possible therapies for their child, what kinds of questions should they be asking?
Yeah, great. I think the therapist really should be thinking about your family as a whole, what your values are, what your capacity is, thinking about the unique temperament of your child, and whether the evidence-based therapies that they are offering is a good fit. And if it's not, that's fine. What else can we do? How can we tweak this? That's the clinician expertise that kicks in, right?
Yeah.
And we actually find that, there's always a way to make something work for a family. There's always a way to individualize this. A beautiful example in talking to one of my speechy colleagues today is a client that they had has a huge fixation on hammocks. And all they wanted to do when they come to their room was lie on the hammock and get pushed and sway and wrapped around it. And this poor speechy is like, we're here to learn how to communicate. Like, I can't have you just lying in this hammock. So what she did was, using the support of an AAC device, started to use what was a special interest of the child and teach them how to communicate for what they want. So it's a beautiful example of, okay, I can use what is presented in front of me. I have to adapt my thinking as the adult in the room and the clinician to make this work for the child in front of me. And I think, that's a really important way of for families to consider if the clinician comes across as really strong, like, no, this is the only thing. It's like, is it? maybe I need to get a second opinion. Maybe I should ask somebody else about it. And we actually thought about this as well and came up with a bit of a model called a consultation meeting for families that might find themselves just kind of a bit unsure. We're not saying, we're going to steal clients from everywhere. That's not the point of this. The point of this is you might be at the start of your journey and you might go, I don't know where to begin. I just got a diagnosis or I just got funding. How do I decide what my biggest priorities are? Because everything seems so urgent. Everything seems so important. And that's a great time to come in and have a chat with us. Or my therapist says this is the only thing. Like, is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about why they might have said that. Have they considered this? And just, I guess, kind of almost advocating for your own rights as a client and as caregivers of kids, right? And then does the therapist also seek out my input? So when I've tried something and I say that didn't work, do they just go, well, try harder? Not helpful. Or do they sit down with me and really start to pull things apart and go, I wonder why. Let's think through this together. How can we start to do this in a way that really is able to get some uptake from the family? Or maybe it's the wrong time for the child. Maybe they're just not ready, Can we park it? Can we do something that interests them?
Yeah, I really like that idea of sort of the flexibility that can only come if you, as a professional, I think, have a pretty good toolbox.
Yeah.
Like you just can't have a spanner.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
You've got to have the spanner and the wrench and the hammer and,
Yeah.
all the different tools that you pull out depending on the job.
Absolutely.
Right? And that comes, again, that's, the journey of evidence and going, right, that can go in the toolbox.
Yeah.
We'll leave that one out for now. But that built-in flexibility that comes with that level of skill and knowledge.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a second set of eyes on the initial problem can really be so fresh.
Yeah.
And really, I can think of a client that came in after seeing a different discipline for about 2 years. And we think about progress, you're not saying, everything needs to be fine in 6 weeks' time or it's wrong. It doesn't work that way. But progress needs to at least have some sort of an incline. And if it's plateaued, then, I think we might have to rejig it, right? And literally, I think just kind of taking a step back, and after 6 weeks actually with us, they started to see things in a completely different light because, again, we're taking a step back and we're going, what else is happening here? I'm seeing the leak. But maybe it's the concrete of this building, and maybe it's the plaster on the walls. I don't know, but something else is happening. And sometimes as therapists, we can really drill down, right? We go, it's this, and we start to just make everything super narrow. And sometimes it's about coming back up and going, right, what is the biggest story here? What is going on? Yeah.
And I think in these conversations that we're having with therapists as well, when families are starting out, I think it's a good question to ask what the risks are.
Yeah.
What are the risks from this type of therapy? Has this been explored before? It's great to know the benefits, but what can be the downsides? Because that'll give families an opportunity to figure out if it's going to be the right process for them.
Definitely. And when you say that, I think about some of our groups that just simply require X amount of time, and there sometimes just isn't flexibility there because it's jam-packed for a reason. And so, it's risk in a different way, right? It's risk in efficacy, or effectiveness or uptake, or you might miss a module and then what? Can I make up for it? that sort of thing. But I think another really important question is how is progress tracked, right?
Yeah.
How do we know things are getting better? Do we have a baseline measure? Did we start with asking you how things are now and then check in again in 6 months? How are things now? Is this actually still something you want to work on, or has something changed?
Yeah,
You know?
and it's a cost-benefit analysis, right, for the family.
Absolutely.
What's the cost of this
Yeah,
too? The
yeah.
amount of energy
Yeah.
that's required to, attend to da-da-da. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, again,
Yeah.
that sort of collaborative approach,
Yeah.
thinking about, what is the family going to get out of this, but what's it going to cost them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I think back about that client that didn't have too much progress, the therapies were in silo, just a child going into the room with the therapist, parents aren't sure about what's happening. You come out 15 minutes later, good luck. Okay. And it's like, well,
It's an
that's
act
not
of faith,
involved.
right?
Like what's going on? How can I support my child?
It's not very transparent.
No, that's a really good point. It's got to be transparent.
Yeah.
Now I need to be able to, always articulate my plan, right? So whenever we see new clients, like I need to present to them, look, I think this is what's happening. I think it's maybe A, maybe B, maybe C. I'm kind of going to hinge my bets on A because
Right.
I could be wrong. So you know what? What do you think?
Yeah.
And then if you agree with me, can we revisit A again? Like in 3 months' time? And if we haven't had much progress, maybe it's B. Like maybe we go back to the drawing board, we formulate together, we collaborate together, and we actually co-develop this beautiful therapy plan.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, it's Teresa again. Just wanting to pop in and let you know a little bit more about the information and resources that we have on our website. We know that navigating the world of disability can be overwhelming. There's a lot to learn and so many decisions to make when you're supporting a child with a disability. That's why we put together a wide range of accessible resources, including how to access NDIS, your child's rights in education, accessing financial supports, transitioning to adulthood, and much more. No matter where you are on your child's journey, you'll find something to support you. The resources are free to download and are accessible at any time from anywhere. To explore our resources and find the information you need, visit kiind.com.au. Now let's head back to the conversation. Thanks, Mei'en. That's really helpful. Sharon, have you got anything else to add?
I think choosing the right therapy is stressful for families. There's so many pressures to get it right. First time, early, all that. Get the diagnosis, get the therapy. There's a lot of pressure and stress on families. So I'd like to acknowledge that. And also a lot of our families are exhausted. It also comes down to how much energy have I got left to invest in exploring evidence-based, who does, so you really want to trust the professionals that you're coming into contact with that are going to steer you down the right path, because a lot of families don't have the emotional bandwidth to do their own research. So I think that's important. And not everybody has the medical literacy or even the computer literacy to do the sorts of, Googling and to be able to even understand, a blurb from PubMed but there are great websites. I'm thinking, is it the Raising Children Network? I think they've done a bit of the work, right? They've already done quite a bit of the work in the background, so that's another resource that you can really trust to go to. But if you are a bit like me, mad to do your own research because you don't trust anybody but your own, one of the things I really like to do is give people the benefit of the doubt and read about the therapy that's being recommended. And then I like to flip it and Google criticisms of. And read what other professionals have said about the same therapy, but coming in with a sort of a critical eye. And then I feel like I'm getting a bit from column A and a bit from column B, and then I look at their respective expertise. And then I kind of feel like I haven't been led down one path by one person's sort of confirmation bias, right? Now I've got a bit of a rounded. So again, this does require a certain emotional bandwidth that not everybody will have. But if you're a bit like that, Googling the two sides of the story and then making your own decision from there can be a good way to, if you, like I said, you've got the energy for it, which I get a lot of people don't.
Yeah. And I think it's nice to remind families that they can take their time.
That's right.
That we get a lot of external. Yep. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Not a sprint.
We've said that in past podcasts as well.
Love it. Yeah. And sometimes families can feel so pressured, right? And our admins, poor thing, they get these calls. Yep, I want speech, I want OT, and I want consult. You're like, oh, we're gonna see you 3 times. Like, are you sure?
Right.
Like, does your child have time to play?
Right.
Do you have time to eat? Like,
what is the cost?
How does this work?
What is the cost?
On a practical level, because these therapies also then require extra time to do the task and to move it to fluency, and then that we can all slow down a bit, I think.
I like that,
because we have spoken about it in the past. If you are funded by NDIS, there's a lot of pressure to get it done, and you might have a 12-month plan, so families think, right, I've got to use all of this funding before the end of the 12 months or my child's never going to get support again. There's lots of, I think, a lot of, not misinformation, but we can get lots of different kinds of information from our peers that might not be right for us. So again, it comes back to getting the information from whatever source, but making it right for you, making it right for your young person.
Who's not going to get a childhood again either, right?
And if you think, those examples of young people who are getting NDIS plans and they're 4 and they're quite large, there's a lot of pressure on families to find
to use
the right
it or
place,
lose it.
And find the right place and do all these things to get that funding sorted. So do feel for them. Absolutely,
definitely. And for families who are also quite keen to learn a little bit more about the research that we've done at CliniKids, we've basically pulled together a systemic review. And so you're more than welcome to have a look at the show notes for additional information on that. Another way that families can find out a little bit more is peak bodies. Look at those organizations and associations that different disciplines basically have to be accountable to, because that's going to be a brilliant way of ensuring that your therapist knows what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think that, peak bodies are a great place as well to share. If, say, your diagnosis is quite rare or in the genetic space, it's a great tip for families to, go to the source of that particular diagnosis too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what we've shared so far gives parents a solid understanding of evidence-based supports and therapies. I think it'd be good for us to discuss the more practical side of that. So how can parents balance evidence with what feels right for their child?
That's a great question. I think trusting their instinct, right? Like as a therapist, I might see your child once every 2 weeks. I pick up certain things that you might not, but when you go home, you're the one that's got to put into practical application what we discussed. So you have a natural instinct. And if something crops up for you in session, as your therapist is talking about it, just speak up. Actually say, hang on a minute, I just don't know how that will work in our family. I know why you're saying this, but I just don't think we can do it right now. And as a therapist, there is actually nothing more helpful than having a client say to me, sorry, you're dreaming. That ain't gonna work. Because then I can go, oh, okay, reality check, Mei'en. That's not going to work. Do better. And it's up to me to then go, okay, let's try it this way then. Or maybe we can think about something else. Like, is there anything you think think? Or do you have an inkling of how we can adapt this somehow? And, you know, I think that's actually really important for parents. Just really knowing that you know your child, right? And hearing them yell, "Mom!" You know, if that's like a hungry mom, or a "help, my device doesn't work, mom," or "Dad, it's like oh, he was late again," or, you know, "I need dad to fix my bike." Like, what is going on? You just know from the tone of your kid. Like, I don't have that expertise. You do. Another thing that, as a therapist, I really value is for parents to be able to come in and tell me what's not working. So I appreciate that sometimes it's just a gut feel, and that's okay. But sometimes if you can have notes down, like, "We tried this at bath time and it doesn't work." It's like, brilliant. Or "We did that and that worked then, but it didn't work then." It's like, well, I want to know that. You're not failing me in any way if it doesn't work. We just actually are trying to problem solve together. So the more things you can come with, the better it is for me.
And that fits in really nicely with the third episode we did with Rachel Callender, where she talked about building collaborative relationships with your therapy or medical team. The importance of being what she referred to as brave, but the importance of being brave and honest, and that is really valuable information. You are the expert of your child. You bring that to the team. But I think in the podcast, Teresa, you also made the point that then the therapy team can take that knowledge forward as well. You know, that's interesting learning for everybody, everybody involved.
Yeah, speaking up and being brave is going to improve and adapt the therapy that your child is experiencing and you are as a family. But then, what we talked about in the beginning about that triangle of support, that what your therapist takes away from those therapy sessions as well improves therapy supports for families in the future as well. And
one of my favourite things that Rachel said during that episode was confusion wastes time. So really important to, you know, bring the knowledge, get it down, get clear, ask questions. It doesn't take more time to ask the right questions, the nuanced questions, right?
Absolutely. We hope everyone listening has gained a lot of new knowledge and confidence from Mei'en. At the end of every episode, we leave our listeners with one last pearl of wisdom. Mei'en, what is the main thing you would like them to take away from today's episode?
I've been thinking long and hard about this. I think the way I like to describe it is finding a good fit. Finding a great therapist is like finding a good pair of shoes. It sometimes can look really good in the shop. You bring it home, you try and break it in. If in 6 months' time you're still getting blisters, I think you need to buy a new shoe. So give it a bit of time, but not so long that you feel trapped, and certainly not if you feel like you can't be brave enough to raise difficult questions honestly. So I think finding a good therapist is important, one that respects where your family's at, one that respects your family values and the things that are important to you, one that is curious and playful with your child, and delights in them, right? And is also this beautiful holding space for you as a family in navigating these waters together, because there is going to be the right therapist for every child. I 100% hand on heart know I am not a great fit for every single family, and I don't intend to be. I just need to swim in my lane and somebody else can swim in their lane. And we're not in competition here because every child is unique and every family is unique. And they will find, like sometimes exactly like what you said earlier on, it can be so pressurizing and you can just feel, I've been on a wait list for this many months. Like I get it. I really do get it. But that therapist needs to work with your family. And I hope that we all can be a bit brave in, having those courageous and difficult conversations of when things don't work. And, if you could, also a little pat on the back when they do. Like, nothing is more delightful as a therapist to know that something has worked, right? And we've kind of almost birthed this together. It's so incredibly encouraging because, even as therapists, we hear the problems and we hear the difficulties and our hearts go out to you guys and families. But it's also so great when we can celebrate wins. And so, I think finding a therapist that fits with your family is really important.
Yes. And Sharon, your pearl of wisdom for today?
I think particularly with disabilities that are complex or rare, there will inevitably be research and knowledge gaps. And you want a therapist who's prepared to acknowledge they don't have all the answers. I think the red flag is when somebody says they do. That's the person I would be walking away from. There's nothing wrong with people admitting the limitations of knowledge.
So true.
I think anybody who says, oh, yes, we know exactly what that is and what the answers are, if you just do what we say, I would be thinking very long and hard about engaging with that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or organisation.
And I think one of the things that comes to mind as you're thinking about that is a family who now has a co-occurring diagnosis of Tourette's. And I'd be the first to say, I don't have a lot of experience in that field, but having that conversation with the family and going, I appreciate this is the diagnosis. This is what I can do. I've signed up for this training. I've contacted these researchers in UCLA. Still waiting for them to call me back, please. And if I learn enough, I feel like I can roll this out with you because I do know what it is.
Yeah.
But if you feel so much more comfortable looking for an expert in that space, please 100% do.
Yeah.
You just got to do what's right for your family.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it's a nice point, and we sometimes share it with families, is, to be brave. It's hard to make a complaint and it's hard to say things aren't working, but if you can, it can be really helpful for everybody.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of the episode. Mei'en, it's been fantastic to have you here. Your knowledge and thoughtful guidance has been invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us. For links and resources mentioned in today's episode, check out the show notes. Stay tuned for our next episode. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you follow on our socials. If you have a friend or know someone who could benefit from the information we discussed today, why not share this podcast with them? The Kiind team is here for you. If you would like a one-on-one support to help you navigate any issues that your family may be dealing with, you can book a free pathway planning session with us. The link will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, email us at hello@kiind.com.au. Thank you for joining the conversation with us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks.
you.
Bye.